On Saturday, May 15th, 2021, in the area of Aztepan de Zaragoza, Mexico, authorities uncovered a crime so horrific that they would say it is the worst they had seen in living memory. Beneath a thick layer of concrete in the basement and scattered throughout various parts of a house lay the bodies of 19 victims. Over 4,000 bone fragments were discovered, but this was only the beginning of the horror. What followed was far more macabre. The perpetrator had a disturbing similarity to the infamous Ed Gein. He had preserved parts of the bodies, making face masks and other grotesque items from the remains of his victims. The man responsible was identified as 74-year-old Andres Mendoza, a butcher by trade who had occasionally sold strange, cheap meat to local residents. Yet during interrogation, Mendoza's confessions revealed horrors far worse than anyone had imagined. The full extent of his depravity was only just beginning to unfold. This case is terrifying, and he did this for roughly 30 years. What drives someone to the point of where they want to make a mask out of people that they have murdered? Sickening. Before we dive in, if you find this video fascinating, then please drop it a like and leave me a comment below. And if you're new here, then please consider subscribing and following me on Instagram. It all really helps. Thank you. This video is created solely for educational and documentary purposes. It does not endorse or condone the criminal actions described within. Andres Mendoza was born on November 29, 1947, in Oaxaca, and he moved to Aztepan in the 1980s. To date, authorities have been unable to locate any of his relatives. It is believed that he may have a sister living in Oaxaca, but no one has come forward or visited him in jail. 12 years ago, Mendoza opened a butcher shop in Aztepan, continuing in the trade until his retirement. Before then, he had worked in a slaughterhouse. He was even involved in local politics, having served as the president of the Citizen Participation Council during the last PAN administration. This is one of the main parties in Mexico. Authorities discovered a photograph of him in his bedroom, standing alongside the PAN mayor from that time. More recently, he joined the campaign team of a mayoral candidate from the pre-PAN alliance. In one photo, Mendoza can be seen actively participating in a campaign event. To those who knew him, Mendoza seemed like an ordinary, well-integrated member of the community. He was well known in his neighborhood, where he was a familiar face, someone people approached for help or advice. Many saw him as a generous man, always willing to lend a hand. A local shop owner recalled how several years ago, Mendoza had eagerly handed out tickets to the neighborhood fair, insisting that everyone should be able to go. He was also known for giving out food packages to single mothers struggling to feed their families, earning a reputation as a kind-hearted, helpful neighbor. Yet beneath this facade of generosity and respectability, a much darker reality awaited discovery. Andrea Mendoza's downfall began on May 14th, 2021, when he accompanied a woman named Raina Mayer to buy mobile phone parts from a market in the Old Town. Raina, who owned a mobile phone repair shop just a few streets away from Mendoza's house. They had become close acquaintances. Over time, Mendoza had built up a friendship with her. He would pop over to the shop and have small conversations, and just seemed like a friendly local guy. And given his reputation for helping others, when he offered to assist her in collecting the products she needed for her business, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. What Mendoza hadn't anticipated was that Raina had told her husband, Bruno, a police officer, that she was going with him to the market. Later that evening, when Bruno returned home from work, his wife was nowhere to be found. neither of their two daughters had seen or heard from her, and despite repeated attempts to reach her by phone, there was no answer. Bruno went to the phone shop at around 11 p.m, but still there was no sign of Raina. Desperate, he went to Mendoza's house, since she said she was going to be with him. Alarmingly, Mendoza claimed that he hadn't seen or heard from Raina all day. Panic set in. Being a police officer, Bruno immediately filed a missing persons report. By the following day, there was still no sign of Raina. Bruno checked nearby CCTV footage, and the last sighting of her was on the street where Mendoza lived. That evening, Bruno, along with his brother-in-law, went to Mendoza's house. They knocked on the door, but the lights were off. Bruno continued to knock, and after a few moments, a voice finally responded from behind the door. It was Mendoza, again claiming that he hadn't seen Raina. Bruno insisted he just needed to ask a few questions about his wife's disappearance, and seeing that she planned to meet him, it was important that they spoke. After a long hesitation, Mendoza unlocked the door. As soon as it opened, Bruno stormed inside, determined to search the house. Quickly, he found some of Raina's personal belongings. He was now convinced that Raina was somewhere in the house, and she was, but not in the way he expected. As Bruno moved from room to room, he did not see his wife anywhere, until he entered Mendoza's bedroom. Amongst some boxes, he noticed something unusual. Moving them aside, it revealed a hidden stairwell leading down to a basement. As he descended into the cold, dark space, he felt an ominous feeling. Once at the bottom, he switched on the light, and he was met with an eerie sight. On a table in front of him lay several large buckets. To his utter horror, when he looked inside them, he seen that they contained body parts, some preserved in salt, others whole limbs. And next to the buckets, he seen something that I am sure will stay with him for the rest of his life. It was a patch of hair. As he lifted it, the horrifying truth was revealed. Attached to the hair was a face, skinned, gruesome, and unmistakably the face of his wife Raina. As Bruno descended down the stairs, Mendoza knew what he would find. Aware his time was up, he attempted to flee. However, at 74 years of age, he did not get very far and was quickly apprehended. Fortunately, a passing patrol car arrived just in time to assist, detaining Mendoza and bringing him back to the house. When questioned about what had happened, Mendoza didn't hesitate to admit that there were even more victims. Within hours, a search warrant was obtained and a massive forensic team descended upon the house, turning 22 Margarita Street in Aztapan into the focal point of nationwide attention. The press had a field day. The operation was immense. Over 20 forensic experts worked tirelessly to comb through every inch of the property, using sonar technology to scan the floors for additional remains. The first phase of the search involved excavating the patio and kitchen area, which were covered with wood and an unknown layer. The second phase focused on the master bedroom and the 20 square meter basement, which has 2 levels and can be accessed via a wooden staircase. The final phase involved digging through another patio area and 2 bathrooms. They discovered bodies in each area, but most were found beneath the basement floor, which had been turned into a grotesque makeshift cemetery. In the basement, the forensic team uncovered more than just bodies. Among the unsettling finds were photographs pinned to the walls of Mendoza's political successes, along with boxes filled with items that appeared to belong to women, such as mobile phones, SIM cards, makeup, clothing, purses, necklaces, and underwear. These objects, though disturbing, were only the beginning. The team found even more horrifying evidence: a pair of feet severed at the ankles, seemingly belonging to a woman, and human organs preserved in both salt and glass jars. Puddles of blood and other fluids were pooled across the floor, and large knives and machetes, stained with blood, lay nearby. Perhaps the most chilling discovery was a collection of skinned faces, perfectly preserved as macabre masks. All of the faces were female, but authorities had no idea who they belonged to. Another horrifying find was a series of notebooks. Inside, Mendoza had meticulously recorded the names, ages, and addresses of his victims, alongside detailed measurements of their body parts. He noted the weight of their heads, livers, legs, ribs, even their breasts. Some of the entries contained personal annotations, revealing just how methodical and depraved his actions had been. These notebooks dated as far back as December 17th, 1974. Further investigation uncovered 28 videotapes and hundreds of photographs. Mendoza had documented everything, capturing hours of footage of the murders and the dismemberments, and taking Polaroid photos of each body part. He had set up cameras on tripods to record the women, showing not just their final moments, but a complete loss of humanity in his chilling obsession. During interrogation, Mendoza confessed to the murder of Rayna. He explained that after they had gone back to his house, he told her that he had developed feelings for her, and he wanted them to be together. Bizarrely, he also admitted to having feelings for her mother. When Rayna rejected his advances, his rage exploded. He described how they began to argue, and in a fit of fury, he grabbed a knife and stabbed her in the neck. As her body crumpled to the floor, he climbed on top of her and viciously and repeatedly stabbed her in the chest. After killing her, Mendoza began the grisly action of dismembering her body, placing parts in buckets and preserving some of them in salt. When asked why he preserved parts in salt, he confessed that he had planned to eat them, revealing that he was, in fact, a cannibal. Also, because he found Rayna particularly beautiful, he skinned her face along with her hair and planned to preserve it as a mask. Mendoza admitted to killing up to 20 other women. He described how he would often hang out at bars late at night, charming women with his demeanor. Some were street workers, others barmaids, or simply women he had met and convinced to have a drink with him. With his political connections and reputation for being a nice guy, many women thought of him as trustworthy. His ultimate goal was to get them back to his house, where he would offer them help or large sums of money. Once they felt comfortable, he would make an intimate advance, and if they rejected him, he believed he had to kill them. Even if they did sleep with him, he might still murder them if he became infatuated. To him, it was his way of making them his forever. Back at his house, Mendoza would ensure the women felt at ease, lowering their guard. When the moment was right, he would strike, stabbing them in the neck or heart, and silencing them quickly. Once dead, he would dismember their bodies. He would only preserve the faces of those he believed to be particularly attractive. Mendoza's background as a butcher made it easier for him to carry out these gruesome acts. What alarmed locals after the news of him being a cannibal broke out was that they remembered that even after he had retired and closed his butcher's shop, Mendoza would occasionally continue to sell cheap meat. He knocked on door to door and claimed the meat came from his hometown in Oaxaca. He called it Oaxaca meat, offering it at heavily discounted prices or even giving it away to families in need. It is now believed that this meat may have come from his victims. Mendoza disposed of the dismembered body parts around his house, but mainly in his basement, covering them with large amounts of cement to mask the horrific stench. Forensic experts later uncovered over 4,000 skeletal remains belonging to at least 17 people. In the weeks leading up to his arrest, neighbors had grown suspicious of Mendoza. He was frequently seen with women who would later vanish without a trace. but his status in the community seemed to shield him from the authorities' suspicion. A neighbor said his sisters always complained that Mendoza was harassing and, quote, pretty young women with his gaze. He continued, they said they did not trust him because he always looked at them and other young pretty women strangely. Besides that, he was always drunk. This footage shows his arrest and subsequent transfer to the Barrentos prison, where he remained as legal proceedings unfolded. After threats from fellow inmates who vowed to eat him in retaliation for his crimes, Mendoza was moved to Tendango del Valle prison for his own safety. During his first hearing, he confessed to 4 murders, offering chilling details of his final killing. Mendoza described how his first victim was a woman named Norma, whom he met in 2001 at a bar. After several rejections, he tricked her into coming back to his house, where he stabbed her to death. His second victim, Bernice Sanchez, was also met at a bar. Mendoza attempted to establish a romantic relationship with her, but when she rejected his advances, he stabbed her in the chest before dismembering her body. In 2016, Mendoza encountered 38-year-old Flor Vizcano, a mother of 2, again at a bar. He took her on several dates and even gave her money. Like the others, Vizcano was not interested in becoming involved with Mendoza, and she too was murdered. In 2019, Mendoza became obsessed with Rubiquela Castelo, a 32-year-old woman, and he kidnapped her. His obsession led him to murder her, just as he had done with the others. Investigators later discovered voter identification cards in his house belonging to both Castillo, who had been reported missing on July 20th, 2019, and Vizcano, who was last seen on October 16th, 2016. Tragically, there are many more women who suffered the same fate, but I cannot name them as they have yet to be identified. Mexican officials continue to work tirelessly to investigate all of Mendoza's crimes. Prosecutor Alexandro Gomez Sanchez has assigned a team of investigators to bring closure to all the families affected. Another property linked to Mendoza has also been identified, where he has confessed to burying even more victims. To date, 6 victims have been identified, and the remains of 13 others are still awaiting identification, but it's suspected that he may have up to 30 victims. Sergio Baltzar, a lawyer hired by Bruno Gonzalez, said, and quote, "These type of people feel pleasure in taking the lives of other people. This person is a psychopath because he does not feel regret. So much so that he tells the public ministry, in the presence of a defense attorney, the circumstances of how it happened, as well as the other events of other people he has murdered. This investigation may take years to fully resolve, but one thing is certain. On March 18th, 2022, Mendoza, the so-called Monster of Aztapan, was sentenced to life in prison. Though the case is far from closed, he will never taste freedom again. This case is truly shocking, and it's hard to believe that he got away with it for so long, whilst being so blatant and sloppy. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay sane.